it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Tom DeLay was appointed as the first CEO of the Carbon Trust in 2001, and he's been at the helm of its impressive growth trajectory into a world-leading organisation, advising businesses and governments on carbon emissions reduction, as well as the development of low-carbon technologies. Please welcome Tom.
Hi, good morning. Sasha, thank you very much for those opening remarks. We'll no doubt come back to the answers to our questions in due course. Firstly, I'd just like to welcome everybody here to what is for us something quite different. It's our first corporate summit that is truly global. So I'd like to wish a very good afternoon to those of us who are working in Asia. I'd like to wish a very good morning to those in Africa and Europe, and I very much hope that those who will be joining us in due course from the Americas are sleeping soundly. This really is very special for us. As an organisation, we've grown significantly on a global footprint, and to be able to engage directly in a global event of this kind is something which truly, without COVID, I'm not sure we would ever have done. The focus very much for today is net zero. We're going to be talking about net zero from every possible angle, but with a very clear focus that net zero is incredibly important going forward. At the end of the day, the economy in 2050 will be about twice the economy that we see today. And the change in scale and the growth to create that much bigger economy is going to be felt particularly in infrastructure and particularly in Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly. And that's why I'm delighted that the sessions this morning will have a strong Asian focus. The challenges, therefore, are huge. And if we just look at the transition to net zero, there are a few things we can think about. Firstly, we've gone from Paris to Greta to COVID. Paris, to me, was all about alignment. Paris Agreement did, if nothing else, align the interests of governments, of corporates, and of the financial institutions of the world with this common aim of developing a science-based outcome, a net zero pathway to 2050. That alignment has been incredibly powerful. Not only have governments rallied around that, and that's cascaded down into cities, regions, and other public bodies, but corporates absolutely raised to the challenge and started setting science-based targets pretty much as the Paris Agreement was signed. We've worked with an awful lot of corporates around the world on science-based targets, target setting, net zero pathways, and it's been an extraordinary experience for us to be part of that journey with them. Financial institutions have absolutely engaged as well. At the end of the day, if you ask me the one thing that would make an enormous difference, it is shifting capital flows to favour a low carbon future and to move away from lock-in investment in the past. So many financial institutions today are struggling with quite how they achieve that. And it is difficult to see how you align your portfolios and your investments. But there are a number of approaches being used. We're working with a number of people on those approaches. And that alignment is going to be very real very soon between finance, between corporates and between governments. Greta, I think, did something quite extraordinary, and we shouldn't underestimate the influence she's had. In essence, she engaged the future. By reaching out, speaking to power so clearly, she has left us all in awe, to be honest, of her impact and the way in which she has absolutely sent a message to governments and to corporates that the people who will vote in future, the people who will be the consumers of the future, the people who will be the savers of the future, are absolutely engaged on this journey and committed to environmental progress and net zero. So Greta, enormously important, but who would have foreseen what happened towards the back end of last year and earlier this year with the pandemic that we are now living through? Clearly, the pandemic has had terrible consequences for both human life, for indeed lifestyles around the world and for economies around the world. It's been tremendously damaging to so many aspects of the world that we know. But there are some positive signs that come out of COVID when you look at sustainability and the progress and the momentum that is being maintained through this very, very difficult time. So whilst I think the nature of today's event very much acknowledges that we are in very strange times, we are doing this event remotely, it nevertheless gives us a time to pause and look at some maybe of the more positive aspects that the pandemic is making available. The first is that at the end of the day, we now realize that we can change a lot more quickly than we thought we might have been able to. The number of times people have said to me, yes, net zero pathways, they're terrific, but let's be honest, there are some compelling reasons why an alternative narrative where we don't move there could also exist. There's an awful lot of lock-in. There are an awful lot of vested interests in short-term thinking and short-term returns. It's hard sometimes to look beyond the short term. But most importantly of all, it's hard to anticipate the kind of change that net zero would imply for pretty much every sector of the economy. And I think if nothing else, this year has taught us that we are able to change as a community, as civil society, and as businesses. We can change very quickly and far more fundamentally than you would have thought possible. And that is an incredible positive step. The second are that all of us in living through COVID have, I think, seen some soft benefits maybe that wouldn't have been apparent in our everyday lives. Everything from work-life balance to comments about the sky seems bluer and certainly the air feels cleaner. I think people have raised their awareness and understanding of their interaction with the environment that they live in. And I think those soft benefits are, again, a very positive outcome, sad though it may be, of the situation that we're living through. So we do have some soft benefits. We do have a recognition that we can change. And the last thing, of course, is that we are going to see through significant economic recovery and stimulus funding, the opportunity to reset the economies for the future. And I think it is that reset of the global economies that's going to be so important. And I hope today we have a chance to explore what that reset might mean for different sectors, for different geographies, because it's absolutely fundamental. Reset will inevitably mean a focus on jobs and employment. It should. But at the same time, let's make sure that if we repurpose environmental momentum towards environmental and economic growth, then we don't lose the environmental aspect in pursuing economic growth and jobs. Now, we've done some research as the Carbon Trust globally over the last few months, to really just take a tab on what the pulse is around COVID and businesses globally. We did the research in Asia, in Europe, and in the Americas, and we found some very straightforward messaging. The first important thing is that we did not research corporate leaders in sustainability and climate change. We researched every sector of the economy, a very broad range, with significant large organizations in every sector of the economy in every one of those jurisdictions. And a couple of key points came out. The first is that sustainability is no longer seen as optional. Those with memories of seeing health and safety become one of those things that organizations now take very seriously, whereas before it might have been seen as a bit of a sideshow, will feel, good gosh, yes, sustainability now has reached that same point where leading organizations, but actually organizations much more broadly, see the inevitability of the transition that we are in and the importance, therefore, of prioritizing it. That came through very clearly in the research that we did. Interestingly, pretty much every sector also showed an increase in the level of engagement relative to a very similar survey that we ran about a year ago before COVID hit in. So momentum, if anything, picking up during a very, very difficult transition phase. The last thing I just comment on is, what else do we see in the research? Well, that most corporates in most parts of the world believe that post-COVID, there will be significant pull on them to do more. That might be in the form of regulation, ties to stimulus funding, indeed consumers actually looking for more action from the corporate sector post-COVID than ever before. And that is very much in sync with what we are seeing at the moment as the Carbon Trust. This year, we have seen a busier year ever. We have seen growth in our operations in Asia with offices in Beijing and Singapore really motoring and really growing themselves. We've seen growth in Africa. We've seen growth in the Americas. Everywhere that the Carbon Trust operates, we've seen significant growth in demand, and we're working very hard to keep the pace up. So I think the last thing I'd just like to say is, well, what would we wish if we had a sort of magic wand? Well, there are a couple of things that we would wish at this very, very difficult time. The first is that we would wish governments around the world to align their stimulus funding to the principles of the Paris Agreement and to a net zero pathway. It's going to be difficult because inevitably governments are going to be drawn to the short-term impact on jobs that COVID is creating, and the temptation to go back and support sectors that are job heavy but not necessarily relevant to the environmental agenda as strongly as others. Please, please, as governments of the world, focus on stimulus in areas that are truly Paris aligned and relevant to the agenda. The second, I think, is that whilst there has been an enormous outpouring of commitments by governments, by corporates, by cities and regions to claim carbon neutrality and net zero, let's make sure that that's real, that those commitments are actually maintained. And we very much believe that the backup to the big commitments is a bottom-up plan that really reflects the realities of an organization, what it can do to optimize its position today, what it should be doing to invest in the medium term, and what options it needs to prepare for in the longer term, right out to 2050. So I think that's important, the bottom-up backing for the commitments that organizations have made. And the very last thing I'd wish for is transparency. Transparency at a level that we've never seen before. Now, I come from a business background, and I know that transparency is a difficult thing. Very often it would appear to compromise commercial confidentiality, strategic positioning, how you are within a market, how you relate to the regulators and those who set the standards that you have to operate in, and indeed how you work with other stakeholders. But transparency in the environmental space is not only essential, but it's expected. There is everybody out there looking to what organizations are doing and how genuine their claims to net zero really are. So transparency, I think, is going to be incredibly important. First, as a proof of sincerity. One of the challenges increasingly coming up with all these claims is, are they genuine? Are they sincere? The reality is the first few things you might do in developing a pathway to net zero might be exactly the same things you would do if you were focused in the short term on maintaining your license to operate. It can be very difficult to tell the difference between a great net zero pathway and one that is frankly just greenwash. And at the end of the day, sincerity and a belief in the organization, its governance and its commitment is going to be incredibly important. So transparency to prove sincerity, I think, is going to be really important. And the second reason for focusing on transparency is that it is the best way to share best practice. Sharing best practice is essential. What we are doing at the moment is really new. It's very hard. We're trying to make change happen faster than the markets would normally allow us to. We're taking risks ahead of things being maybe fully proven. We're dealing with an awful lot of uncertainty when you look further out in terms of what the market conditions might be, what expectations of consumers might be, what license to operate conditions might operate in certain sectors in certain parts of the world. And lastly, what technologies might come along that will enable change that we would never have anticipated. So best practice is really important because if you're trying to navigate those very uncertain drivers, actually doing it with others is a very good way of both mitigating the risk and capturing the opportunities more quickly than you otherwise would. And so sharing is really also the theme that I see in today's summit. It's all about listening to others, understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it, sharing best practice simply by listening, understanding and contributing. And I would ask everybody to come in with your questions, to make this a dialogue, not simply an outpour. And that would make today really very special. The fact that we are able to do this virtually, but also globally, gives us a chance to bring people together in a way that is very special. It's only one day, but it's one day that we hope will make a big difference. Lastly, I'd just like to thank a few people. Firstly, I'd just like to thank all our colleagues in the Carbon Trust for the extraordinary work that they have done this year and they continue to do. As I've said, we are seeing unprecedented demand in pretty much every aspect of our work and pretty much globally. And I know that's put an enormous toll on people who have had to work often from home, often in very difficult circumstances. And a big thank you to staff. We really do appreciate that you're doing something out of the ordinary. And I'd also like to thank our clients and partners. You have been with us on the way, on the journey. You continue to be with us on this journey. Without you, we will be nothing. The success of the Carbon Trust, the impact that we have in terms of our mission, is entirely down to the progress that we can help make through others. So thank you very much for being with us on this journey. We really appreciate it. That's all I've got to say really today. I'm going to come back a little bit later on, moderating one of the sessions. But at this point, I probably ought to hand over back to Sasha. Thank you very much indeed.